There is a letter, never made public. A letter that could reveal the secret Philip McKeon kept his entire life. But does it really exist? Or is it just another Hollywood rumor? He was the picture of innocence, the kid America wanted as their own. With bright blue eyes and a smile that seemed to promise nothing but sunshine, Philip McKeon became a household name in the late 1970s. Week after week, millions of viewers tuned in to CBS's hit sitcom Alice, watching him play Tommy Hyatt, the perfect son. Tommy wasn't just a role, he became a cultural symbol. For nearly a decade, America didn't just watch Philip act, they watched him grow up. But what happens when the boy America adopts on screen refuses to grow into the man they expect off screen? Behind every perfect picture, there is a shadow. And behind Philip's angelic smile, there was silence. Silence about who he loved, silence about what he wanted, silence that, over time, began to speak louder than words. To understand that silence, we have to go back to where his story began, in a small town on Long Island. Philip Anthony McKeon was born on November 11, 1964, in Westbury, New York. A small town, a quiet beginning. His childhood looked like the American dream. Loving parents, a sister who would also go on to become a star, and a home filled with warmth and ambition. By the age of 4, he was already standing in front of cameras, modeling for magazines and commercials. Broadway soon followed, and then fate. A chance encounter with Linda Lavin, who saw something in the young boy and recommended him for the role that would change his life. It looked like the perfect beginning to a perfect career. From the outside, his story seemed scripted for success. The sweet son on TV, the teen idol in the magazines, the star every girl wanted on her bedroom wall. And yet, there were no girls, no stories of teenage romance, no tales of heartbreak, no carefully staged photographs with a date at his side. Just silence. And in Hollywood, silence breeds rumor. This was the late 70s, early 80s, a time when being gay in the entertainment industry wasn't just taboo. It could end a career. Some actors played along, staging relationships to keep the press satisfied. Others disappeared into anonymity. And then there were those like Philip, who said nothing at all. That nothing became everything. Fans speculated, tabloids whispered, and those whispers turned into a question that would follow him for the rest of his life. Was Philip McKeon hiding his truth, or was he simply a man who valued privacy over fame? The boy America loved was becoming a man, but he was becoming something else too, a mystery. And it is in those missing pieces, in the questions he never answered, that Philip McKeon's story begins to blur the line between fact and speculation, between the image we adored and the reality we may never truly know. What came next would reveal just how powerful and dangerous that silence could become. As the 1980s began, Philip McKeon was everywhere. Smiling from magazine covers, plastered on bedroom walls, and etched into the imaginations of teenagers across America. He wasn't just a supporting character on Alice. He was the boy who grew up alongside a generation of viewers. From his early preteen years to his late teens, millions watched him change before their eyes. His voice deepening, his face maturing, his presence shifting from cute child to young man. Few actors are granted such visibility, and even fewer survive it intact. But visibility comes at a cost. The brighter the spotlight, the darker the shadows it casts. As his fame grew, Philip's image stayed untouched. Magazines showed him smiling, wholesome, the perfect boy next door. But behind that polished surface, something felt almost too controlled, too pristine. Unlike the usual chaos that surrounded young stars, his life appeared spotless. And in Hollywood, a spotless image can be more suspicious than a scandal. The public started to notice what wasn't there. No stories of a first kiss, no breathless headlines about romances with co-stars, no jealous fans writing hate letters to supposed girlfriends. In the glossy world of teen celebrity, absence becomes louder than presence. And in Philip's case, the silence around his love life began to drown out everything else. Some dismissed it. He's just shy, they said. Others whispered that perhaps his parents or CBS wanted to shield him, to preserve the wholesome image of Tommy Hyatt. But Hollywood is a town built on speculation, and where information doesn't exist, stories are invented. Was Philip hiding someone? Was there a secret romance that never saw the light of day? Or was there no romance at all, a choice or a necessity shaped by something deeper? The whispers turned into labels. The word gay floated around fan circles and gossip columns, rarely printed outright but always implied. It was the late 70s, early 80s, a time when the word itself carried weight, scandal, and danger. An openly gay actor in a family sitcom? Impossible. Networks would have panicked, advertisers would have pulled out, and careers would have vanished overnight. So the silence remained. Philip said nothing. He didn't confirm. He didn't deny. He let the mystery fester, and that mystery became part of his brand. To some fans, it made him even more alluring, the untouchable idol, the boy no one could quite figure out. To others, it was unsettling. In an era that demanded clarity, Philip was a question mark. Behind the scenes, friends and colleagues described him as kind, intelligent, sometimes reserved, but no one seemed to know the full picture. And if they did, they weren't talking. The longer the silence stretched, the more it shaped his narrative. Teen magazines stopped asking about crushes because there were never answers. Journalists shifted focus to his career, his growth as an actor, his ambitions behind the camera. But the question lingered, always just below the surface. Why did Philip McKeon never play the game? There is power in silence. There is also danger. Silence allows people to fill in the blanks with their own imagination, and in Hollywood, imagination can be ruthless. As Alice approached its final seasons, Philip's boyish innocence gave way to something else. A quiet maturity, a sense of distance. Fans who had adored him as a child idol found themselves confronted with a man they didn't quite recognize. Was it simply the natural evolution of growing up in front of millions? Or was it the weight of carrying a secret year after year under the glare of cameras that demanded constant performance? By 1985, when Alice finally ended, Philip McKeon was no longer just a former child star. He was an enigma, a man defined as much by what he didn't say as by what he did. And the silence, the same silence that had once protected him, was about to become the very thing that haunted him. Because in Hollywood, unanswered questions don't fade, they echo. And for Philip McKeon, those echoes would follow him long after the applause had stopped. And once the applause was gone, the silence became even louder. And when the cameras finally stopped, when Alice faded into television history, the echoes began. Hollywood had moved on to fresher faces, hungrier stars, but Philip McKeon, he seemed to vanish. There were guest roles here and there, fleeting appearances on Chips, Fantasy Island, The Love Boat, a couple of low-budget films that came and went without notice. But the boy America once claimed as their own no longer belonged to the spotlight. The transformation was startling. One day, he was a familiar face in millions of homes, and the next, he was barely a footnote. And in that sudden absence, the questions only grew louder. Was Hollywood turning its back on him? Or was Philip the one walking away, retreating into shadows where the cameras could no longer ask the questions he refused to answer? What remained of his career flickered in and out, like a weak signal on a television set. In 1987, he appeared in Return to Horror High, a cult favorite for some, but hardly the role to redefine a career. Ghoulies 4, Red Surf, 976, Evil 2. Projects that seemed to bury him deeper in the fringes of Hollywood rather than elevate him back into the mainstream. To his fans, it was heartbreaking. To the industry, it was predictable. Because once America has decided who you are, it rarely allows you to change. Philip wasn't Philip anymore. He was still Tommy Hyatt. And Tommy Hyatt didn't grow up to play anti-heroes or broken men. Tommy Hyatt stayed frozen in time, the perfect son. And when Philip tried to step beyond that image, the industry had no script for him. So he stepped back, behind the cameras, into production, direction, and eventually radio. Out of the harsh spotlight, into the quieter corners of entertainment where he could work without scrutiny. But the irony was sharp. His attempt to escape attention only fueled more speculation. Fans searched for him, and in the gaps, they found meaning. He didn't marry. He didn't flaunt relationships. He didn't even deny the rumors. He simply let the silence continue. For those who had grown up with him, the mystery of Philip McKeon was no longer about his career. It was about who he really was. Message boards and fan clubs kept the questions alive. Old clips from Alice resurfaced, bringing back memories but also reigniting whispers. How could a man once so visible, so adored, become so invisible? Did he choose solitude, or was solitude the price of something he could never admit publicly? The Hollywood of the 1990s was beginning to change, but slowly. Coming out could still destroy careers, even as whispers about others. Into that shifting landscape, Philip's silence seemed even more conspicuous. Was he hiding, or had he simply been forgotten? Each rare appearance, a credit on a small project, a quiet interview, was dissected by fans hungry for answers. They looked for clues in his eyes, his posture, his words. But Philip never offered more than surface glimpses. The man who once lived in America's living rooms now lived in secrecy. By the time the early 2000s arrived, it was clear that Philip McKeon's career would never mirror his childhood fame. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps he had grown tired of being watched, of being defined by a role that belonged more to the public than to him. Perhaps, in his retreat, he had found freedom. And yet, Hollywood doesn't easily forgive disappearances. When stars vanish, it demands explanations. And when explanations don't come, it invents them. For Philip, the silence was never neutral. It became a canvas on which others painted their own truths. Some painted him as a recluse by choice, happily working behind the camera and free from fame's chaos. Others painted him as a man forced into the shadows, punished by an industry unwilling to embrace the possibility that its perfect son had secrets it couldn't tolerate. The truth? That remained hidden, as it always had. And in that hidden space, the mystery of Philip McKeon only deepened. Because sometimes the most haunting disappearance isn't one of absence, but of transformation. When someone once so vividly present fades into something you can't quite define. Not gone, not forgotten, just untouchable. And that is how Philip McKeon, the boy who grew up in America's living room, became something far more enduring than a child star. He became a riddle, but riddles don't stay buried, they resurface again and again in whispers. By the time Philip drifted into the quieter corners of the industry, his career had become secondary to something else entirely. The whispers. They had begun when he was still on Alice. Faint, almost invisible, tucked in between fan letters and gossip magazine blurbs. A comment here, a curious look there, a sentence half finished over coffee. At first it was nothing. But nothing, repeated often enough, begins to take shape. As the years passed, as Philip remained on his own, the whispers refused to fade. They grew louder, sharper, more insistent. For some, it was idle curiosity. For others, it became an obsession. Because in Hollywood, where every actor's life was supposed to be an open book, Philip McKeon's pages were sealed shut. The absence was impossible to ignore. No marriage announcements in the trades, no glamorous companions on his arm at premieres, no stories of high school sweethearts, co-star romances, or broken engagements. For a boy who had grown up in front of millions, there was only silence. And silence is rarely empty. It becomes a canvas onto which the world paints its own pictures. So speculation filled the void. Was he hiding someone, a secret love that could never be spoken of aloud? Was he protecting himself, aware that truth carried risks far greater than gossip? Or was he simply a man who valued solitude in an industry built on spectacle? The timing mattered. The 1980s and 90s were decades of contradiction, an age when television was filled with smiling families, yet real families were fractured by fear. Rock Hudson's death in 1985 had sent a shockwave through the entertainment world, ripping the curtain back on a secret everyone already knew, but no one dared say out loud. That gay men in Hollywood lived in closets built not of wood or steel, but of contracts, image, and fear. Executives understood the danger. Agents whispered warnings. Careers could be erased overnight. Some stars crafted illusions to survive. A girlfriend introduced to reporters, a staged date at a restaurant, a carefully placed photo in a magazine. These smoke and mirror romances were enough to keep questions at bay. But Philip offered none of that. He never played the game. His silence was not camouflage. It was emptiness. And emptiness is dangerous because it forces the imagination to run free. Those who knew him well described him as private, deeply private. He valued his family, especially his sister Nancy, and a small circle of trusted friends. Beyond that, the details blurred. There were no confessions, no memoirs, no late-night television appearances where he laughed off rumors or spun charming anecdotes about his love life. He simply gave nothing away. And unanswered questions in the Hollywood machine never die. They linger. They recycle. They resurface in new forms, feeding themselves with every year that passes. In the 1990s, as the internet began to crack open the old gatekeeping of gossip, his name would surface again on message boards and in fan discussions. Was he gay? Why had he never married? Why was there always a blank space where his personal life should have been? Each time, the questions were asked with the same intensity, as if people were determined to solve a puzzle that offered no solution. And then, when he was gone, the puzzle only grew darker. Even after his death in 2019, the conversation did not stop. If anything, it grew louder. Because when a man lives his life without ever giving an answer, his silence becomes permanent. It turns into legend. Some argue that Philip's silence was the answer, that by never denying, never fabricating, never staging, he allowed the truth to hover, half visible, like smoke you can see but never grasp. Others insist he was never hiding anything at all, that the world, unable to accept a man who valued privacy above performance, invented secrets that did not exist. The truth? Perhaps it lies somewhere in between. Perhaps Philip McKeon carried a reality he could never share, knowing the cost in his era would be devastating. Or perhaps he simply lived exactly as he wished, unbothered by the whispers, letting others drown in their own assumptions. But the rumors never died. They became part of his story, stitched into his name as tightly as the role of Tommy Hyatt itself. You cannot speak of Philip McKeon without hearing the echoes of those questions, not in his own voice, but in the voices of everyone who speculated about him. And perhaps that is the strangest legacy of all, that a man who spoke so little about his private life ended up defined by it. His career, his work, his years behind the camera, all of it overshadowed by the mystery of what he never said. Because in Hollywood, mystery is magnetic, and the mystery of Philip McKeon The boy who belonged to everyone on screen, yet to no one off screen, remains one of its most haunting enigmas. Hollywood in those years was a machine of paradox. It sold love stories and happy endings, but demanded that its actors keep certain truths buried deeper than any script. Careers were built on illusions. The carefully staged dates, the smiles photographed outside restaurants, the whispered romances that never quite existed. Many of Philip's peers learned to survive by playing along, slipping into false narratives as if they were just another role. But Philip never seemed willing to do that. He didn't offer cover stories. He didn't stage a girlfriend for the cameras. He left the space empty, and emptiness is far more dangerous than a lie. For the studios, a lie could be repeated until it hardened into fact. But a void asks questions. A void grows louder the longer it stays unfilled. And so the silence around Philip became its own scandal. Every interview where he dodged a personal question, every public appearance where he stood alone, every passing year without explanation, each absence added to the legend. To the audience who had once known him as Tommy Hyatt, the boy they had watched grow up in their living rooms, the man he became seemed increasingly unknowable. Some said he was hiding someone, a secret love too fragile to survive in the harsh light of the tabloids. Others insisted he was only protecting himself, guarding a truth that the world of the 1980s was still too cruel to accept. And still others believed he was simply indifferent, that the boy America adored had grown into a man unwilling to perform beyond the screen. Whatever the truth, the silence gave rise to endless speculation. Fans searched for answers where none were given, painting their own images onto the blank canvas of his private life. The irony was sharp. Those who hid behind elaborate facades, who lived carefully scripted public romances, often escaped scrutiny. But Philip, by refusing to play the game at all, seemed more exposed than any of them. To some, his silence was proof. Proof of what? No one could say. Proof of what, perhaps, no one had the right to demand. And yet, the whispers didn't fade. They grew. They followed him between projects, into the long, quiet stretches when his name disappeared from credits, into the rare photographs that surfaced years apart. And still, the questions piled up. Why didn't he do what so many others did? Arrange a harmless story, a pretend girlfriend, a half-truth that would have satisfied the magazines. Why was his silence so absolute, so deliberate, that it seemed less like modesty and more like defiance? Did he believe that by giving nothing away, he was keeping his dignity intact? Or was he trapped in a system where even the smallest truth could be fatal to a career, to a reputation, to a future? The whispers twisted into every corner of his legacy. A man so present on screen, yet so absent off it. A familiar face paired with an unfamiliar story. A career that the world could chart, but a life that no one could map. For his fans, the contrast was irresistible. The more he withheld, the more they reached for answers, as if his silence were a code waiting to be cracked. What was he protecting? What secret did he carry so carefully for so long that even in death it refused to reveal itself? Or was the secret nothing at all, just a story created by the world's refusal to accept that a man might choose privacy over performance? Perhaps he was protecting someone else. Perhaps he was protecting himself. Or perhaps he was protecting nothing at all. Only the right to live quietly, without surrendering every piece of himself to a public that had already claimed so much. And in that tension, between what was said and what was left unsaid, Philip McKeon drifted further into shadow until he was less a man than a riddle. A riddle Hollywood never solved, and perhaps never truly wanted to solve, because sometimes the question itself is more powerful than the answer. A question that clung to him in life and only grew sharper in death, as though his very silence had been rehearsed, performed, and perfected into a legacy all its own. When the news came in December of 2019, it was almost clinical. Philip McKeon had died, age 55, after what was described only as a long illness. No cause, no detail, just a single line followed by silence. For a man who had lived his entire life wrapped in mystery, perhaps it was fitting. But almost immediately, the silence began to fracture, because whispers surfaced of something else. A letter. Or perhaps just a note. Some claimed Philip left behind pages written in his own hand, words that revealed the battles he had carried for decades. If true, this would have been the one time he chose to speak without a filter, without performance, without silence. In those rumored lines, he described years of anxiety, of depression that had begun when he was still a teenager under the blinding heat of studio lights. He confessed to the loneliness of being America's son on screen, while inside he was quietly unraveling. "I spent so long pretending I was okay," the letter supposedly read, "because I didn't want to disappoint anyone. Because I thought if I showed how broken I was, people would turn away." Others say the words weren't about Hollywood at all, but about family, about his younger sister Nancy, the bond they shared, the love that sustained him, and the guilt that haunted him. He spoke, they say, of his pride in her success, but also the ache of living in her shadow, never feeling quite enough, never certain he deserved the adoration poured on him as a child. He thanked her for being his anchor, his light, even in the years when he withdrew from the world. To those who believe this version, the letter was not a confession of scandal, but of devotion. The raw voice of a man who had loved deeply but spoken too little. And yet there are those who insist the truth went deeper. That the letter, whether a single page or something more, was Philip's final attempt to whisper what he had never been able to say aloud. A truth about who he was, who he loved, what he had sacrificed to preserve an image that was never his to begin with. If such words were ever written, they would not just explain the silence of his life, they would redefine it. But here's the mystery. No one outside his closest circle has ever seen this letter. Was it hidden? Was it destroyed? Or was it only a rumor, born from the public's refusal to accept that silence could be final? Just as his absence during life had sparked decades of speculation, so too did his death. The official cause was illness. But illness is not a story. Illness cannot explain the decades of whispers, the deliberate solitude, the carefully guarded life. To fans, the lack of detail became its own kind of evidence. Evidence of secrets never spoken. Evidence that Philip McKeon had carried something to the grave, something the world had always demanded but never received. Maybe the letter exists. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it was never meant for public eyes at all. But the idea of it, the thought that somewhere, locked away, lies the truth Philip never gave us, has become part of his legend. And legends, as Hollywood knows too well, are more powerful unfinished than complete. The silence itself has become the inheritance. Every fan, every friend, every stranger who once watched him grow up on television has in some way been left holding a fragment of it. The mystery has no edges, no clear center. It shifts depending on who tells the story, who remembers the boy on the screen, who imagines the man behind closed doors. Some see sorrow, others see shame. Some see nothing at all, only the stubborn refusal of a man who would not surrender his truth to the world. Perhaps Philip McKeon's last performance was not on a stage, not on a screen, but in the uncertainty he created. A script with no final act, a riddle with no answer. And in that unfinished silence, he remains untouchable, more present in mystery than he ever was in clarity. Philip McKeon's story resists resolution. It resists the neat arc that Hollywood loves to impose, the rise and fall structure that allows audiences to package a life into something easily understood. His career was real, his talent undeniable, his work both in front of and behind the camera documented. Yet what defined him, what still defines him, is not what we saw. It is what we never knew. He was the boy who grew up in millions of living rooms, the face America adored, the child actor who managed to navigate adolescence without scandal. And then, he was the man who stepped away, who drifted into quieter corners of the industry, who refused to explain himself when the world demanded answers. That refusal became its own performance, one more enduring than any scripted role. Because silence, when held long enough, becomes louder than words. In the end, Philip left behind two legacies, the tangible one of his career and the intangible one of his mystery. The first can be measured, the episodes of Alice, the films, the directing and producing credits. But the second is immeasurable. It exists not in film reels or credits, but in questions. Why didn't he play the game? Why didn't he allow himself the shield of a fabricated romance, the comfort of a public script? Why did he cling so fiercely to the private space others surrendered so easily? Perhaps the answer lies in the very paradox of Hollywood itself. This was an industry built on make-believe, where truth was less valuable than illusion. Yet in that environment, Philip's greatest act of defiance may have been his refusal to participate in the lie. In a world obsessed with labels, he remained unlabeled. In a culture hungry for confession, he offered none. That restraint, whether born of fear, pride, or simply a desire to be left alone, turned into a radical act. And that is what unsettles us even now, because we live in a society that demands clarity, a box to check, a category to assign, a definition to hold on to. If someone doesn't offer it, we invent it. Was he gay became the eternal question. Yet the question itself reveals more about us than about him. Why do we need to know? Why is a person's private truth considered public property, especially when that person has given us so much already? The speculation around Philip McKeon has lasted decades, not because of what he revealed, but because of what he withheld. And in that withholding, he forced us to confront our own discomfort with ambiguity. We want answers, he left us none. And so we turned his silence into myth. And perhaps that is the final irony. The boy who belonged to everyone on screen never fully belonged to anyone off screen. He walked through life offering pieces of himself, his face, his talent, his work, but never the whole. The rest he kept guarded, protected, hidden, and in that act he ensured that even in absence he would not be forgotten, because mystery endures longer than certainty. So maybe the real story isn't about what Philip McKeon told us, but about what he never did. His silence became the mirror, reflecting our questions, our assumptions, our need to label what we don't understand. And in that mirror, we see less of him and more of ourselves. And now, I want to hear from you. Do you think the letter exists? Was Philip's silence a shield, a wound, or a choice? Drop your thoughts below, because sometimes the conversation we have after the story ends is the story itself. And if you want to uncover more Hollywood mysteries like this, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you won't miss the next Untold story.